All right, welcome everyone to FCI Live. This is our Fall 22 series, and this is our second week, and we are wrapping up with our final day with some excellent presentations. My name is JQ Hanna. I'm the Assistant Director of Food Co-op Initiative, the host of the series, and this is the silent phase of fundraising with Katie Novak from Katie Novak Cooperative Coaching. This is such an important and under-discussed parts of raising capital if you're going to actually do raising capital from individuals and owners through capital campaigns, through donor campaigns, through individuals. The silent phase is a critical piece to understand. And Katie, I loved when she suggested honing in on this, because I don't think anyone's really talked about this. And there's a lot of misconceptions out there about what it is, why it's important, how you do it. So I'm not going to take up any more time. I'm just going to say, I'm so glad Katie is here. And if you have questions and comments as we go, please do throw them in the chat. And with that, I'll turn it over to Katie.
Awesome. Thank you, JQ. Welcome, everyone. It is my pleasure to get to talk to you today. I am going to share my screen. Got a few slides ready for you. There we go. Okay, so I am so happy to be able to talk with you guys today about the silent phase of fundraising. But before I get into that, I wanted to just share my appreciation for FCI and for these series of events and everything that FCI does. JQ personally, as the GM at Common Ground Food Co-op in Champaign-Urbana, was a huge assistance to Green Top Grocery, where I worked as a outreach manager way back when, and JQ personally, as well as FCI, has been such a huge supporter of me and of Green Top Grocery. And I want to thank you, JQ and FCI, for doing these, because it's a way for us to practice Principle 6, which is co-ops helping co-ops. And that's a big benefit and reason why I do this work, is because I love the cooperative principle. But what we're going to talk about today is the silent phase of fundraising. And through this presentation, I hope that we're going to pursue the answer to some questions. And those three questions today are: what is the silent phase of fundraising? Why is it important? And is my co-op ready? Pretty much what JQ was talking about before we got started. Before we get into the answers to those questions, though, I do just want to set the stage in terms of what we mean when we talk about fundraising. And as JQ mentioned before we got started, this is designed for fundraising that includes participation from your owners. So if your capital fundraising, if your fundraising to open your store includes preferred shares, loans, donations from owners, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about that type of fundraising. And typically a startup cooperative capital campaign is a short-term, intense time frame where we're raising this capital for a specific need. In our case, likely it's to open a store. I think we have an open co-op joining us today. Maybe it's for an expansion or to replace some equipment, but for a specific need, a short-term pursuit of funding for a specific need. And it's important to keep that in mind. And by short-term, I mean it has a start and an end. So it's 8 to 12 weeks probably, but it has a definite start and a definite end. And it typically includes things like loans, shares, donations. We've talked about that a little bit. I'm not going to get into those specifics today. We're going to talk about the overall process and philosophy behind a silent phase, not necessarily the specifics of a capital campaign, but it's important to understand the type of capital campaign that we're referring to here. So we know it's a short-term push for funding. It's owner to owner. So this is cooperative volunteers, co-op owner volunteers reaching out to fellow owners to educate them about the capital campaign and provide the opportunity to participate. It has a finite beginning and end, and it includes options for owners to participate. So now we know that. Now we can talk about what the silent phase of that fundraising looks like. And for us, in the cooperative capital campaign world, the silent phase of fundraising is the preceding weeks before campaign goes live. So when I talk about that finite start and that finite end, this is the period of time before it starts, before it's live. So we're going to use an example today. And that example is a cooperative who is attempting to raise $1 million starting November 1st. Now, caveat here, November 1st is not a good time to start your capital campaign. You don't want to do this during the holidays, but in the essence of where we are, it's where we are in the year, we're going to use November right now, and we're going to raise $1 million starting November 1st. The silent phase of our campaign starts now, starts October 1st at the latest. So you want to start at least 4 weeks before your campaign goes live, before you announce it and you start, you have a big party. And we could talk about all that in another topic, another FCI Live perhaps, but this is the time period leading up to the active phase of your fundraising. You want to raise between 10 to 15% of your overall campaign goal during this time frame. So in our example, we want to raise $100,000 to $150,000 before November 1st. Before our campaign goes live on November 1st. So that on November 1st, when we have this big to-do, this big Zoom event or this big party, we can tell our owners, hey, we've already raised $150,000. We're off to a great start. And these types of conversations, this silent phase, are one-on-one or two-on-one in some instances, in-person direct asks to people who have been 100% supportive of the co-op. So board members, current board members, absolutely should be participating in the silent phase of your campaign. And if you can get 100% participation from them, that's another feather in your cap that you can talk about down the road. But you don't want to simply ask your current board, you want to talk to your past board members too. And you want to invite them to participate in this silent phase of your campaign. You want to talk to all of your committees, all of your committee members and volunteers, past and present. And hopefully in your organizing efforts, you have come across some strong supporters, people who have said, hey, you know what, when we get to the point where we're ready to start raising money, come talk to me because I'd like to learn more about that. Those are the people that you want to be talking to during this silent phase of fundraising. And you also want to be looking at influential community members and co-op owners. So if there are people who you know in your community, when they do something, everyone else does it, those are the people you want to be thinking about approaching right now. And hopefully they're already owners and they're already invested in the co-op. But if they're not, you absolutely want to be starting those conversations right now. So why is the silent phase of fundraising so important? It's a huge indicator of success. And in the example I just gave you, if in our instance, we are able to raise $150,000 before November 1st, when we have our big kickoff event, we can go to that event shouting from the rooftops our success so far. We're off to a great start. We've already raised 15% of our goal. We're on the right track. And we know that co-ops who are successful in this silent phase of fundraising are usually successful in securing the remainder of the funds. And I'm using the term silent phase. There are lots of different words people use to talk about this. The soft ask, the quiet phase. There's numerous ways to talk about this, the pre-campaign, but we are talking about those weeks leading up to the campaign when we're making these asks. And when we do them and we do it successfully, it indicates that we can be successful raising our funds, and it helps us build momentum right out of the gate with the capital campaign. And that's really important that you start strong. Now, is your co-op ready? And this is where we're going to spend a bulk of our time today, really talking through how to know if you've done everything you need to do to be able to pursue your capital campaign, and not just your capital campaign, but the silent phase of your capital campaign. So has your co-op met all of your developmental benchmarks? And this is This is a topic we could spend 3 days talking about. So we're not gonna get into a lot of detail here, but have you hit your ownership milestones? Do you have enough owners? Have you secured your site? Is everything done there? Is your pro forma in good order? Have you done all of the things? Do you have strong systems in place and the right people on your board? Have you done the work necessary to get your co-op to where it is today? And this takes years of work. This is not something you do, this week. This is something you want to be evaluating throughout your development. Is if you're making those, you're hitting those benchmarks, and where you are in hitting those benchmarks in determining your readiness for your capital campaign, as well as the silent phase of your campaign. Do you have strong community connections? Are you connected to the right organizations in town? Does your community know who the co-op is, what you stand for, what you're active in, what you're involved with? Do you have relationships with the local foundation, with local funders? Have you done that work to make sure the right people know about the project so that when the funding opportunity becomes available, they are ready? Have you used professional guidance? And when we're talking about professional guidance, specifically as it relates to a capital campaign, I'm talking about legal guidance. So when we're executing a capital campaign for a cooperative, especially when we're using loans and preferred shares, there are lots of legal ramifications and paperwork that have to be done in order to set your co-op up for success. And it's really important that you get your legal team in place earlier than later. I haven't yet worked with an attorney who exceeds my expectations in terms of timeliness. They often tend to operate a little slower than I would like. So I absolutely would encourage you to seek that guidance earlier. But there's lots of other professional guidance that's important when you're thinking about your capital campaign. Your pro forma, absolutely, you want to make sure that you have very strong understanding that your project can be successful, and the pro forma supports that. And then, of course, because I assist co-ops with capital campaign planning, I think it's important that you get professional assistance in that regard as well. Does your co-op have strong volunteers? So when we're talking about the silent phase of fundraising, this is pretty intimate and important conversations that we're having. So you want to make sure you've got the right people in place to do this. And preferably you want someone who has done this kind of ask before. But if you have the right candidate who has the right skill set, we absolutely can get them the training they need to be able to make these asks. But you really want to make sure that you have strong volunteers, and that those volunteers have the time and capacity to execute this kind of work. So this is time consuming. Raising capital for a co-op grocery store is time consuming. It's a lot of work. The silent phase is a good chunk of that work. And so you really want to make sure that the volunteers you have lined up can allocate the time they need to be able to do the work that we're asking them to do. Have you done the necessary prospecting and strategy work? This is a big topic. And again, we could spend a lot of time on this topic itself. But this isn't something we go into blindly. A silent phase of a capital campaign in general, isn't something that we go into blindly. We don't just say, hey, we got 1,000 people on our list, we're gonna start calling them. No, we really wanna take that list and we wanna look at it and we wanna dissect it and determine, hey, who on that list do we need to make part of our silent campaign? We know the board members and the committee members and the volunteers and the strong supporters. We know they're going to be on that list, but who else? Who else on our ownership list is going to be a good candidate for a conversation during this phase of our fundraising? And it's important that you go through that work. And there are paid ways to do that. You can pay a fee to have someone take your list and tell you what their giving capacity is. I haven't seen a co-op go down that path. We typically don't have a lot of extra funds laying around, but there are some grassroots ways we can do that. And I've seen co-ops be very successful in that, and I'd be happy to talk through that with you if you'd like to. So you take that list, you take your ownership list, along with the list of all the other people that we've talked about, and you've identified who you want to contact during the silent phase of fundraising. Now, what do you do? What do you do next? So, and who does it? So talking through that strategy and deciding who it is, you've got 1 through 10 on this list of people that we want to talk to over here. And we've got 3 volunteers who are going to do this work. A is going to talk to number 1, and B is going to talk to number 2, and C is going to talk to number 3, and we divvy it out, and we know exactly who is going to speak with who. And we do that strategically. A knows 1, and so they already have a connection. They already feel comfortable talking to each other. And B, they used to work with number 2 back in the day. So they have a significant connection. So you want to really look at your volunteer list and your list of people that you want to talk to, and you want to match them up the best you can. I recommend that you send 2 members of the cooperative to meet with 1 owner or 1 family. Sometimes when you have a conversation like this, oftentimes you'll get both household members, both leaders of a household, if there are 2 of them. And that's best, because then you have a chance to make a connection with both decision makers. But so you decide who's going to talk to whom, and then what happens next after that. You have to think through this whole process. So now I know who I'm going to talk to. What am I going to say to them? And what do I need to take with me? And is this a Zoom call or a phone call, or do we meet at a coffee shop? How does that look? What does that look like? And so as a planning team, we need to figure out what that strategy is. What do we want these meetings to look like? And you also want to be able to tailor the meeting to the person you're meeting with. So for example, this is hopefully a 45-minute meeting to an hour. If you get someone who can give you that amount of time, that's the best case scenario. But you might get someone who wants to meet with you but has 15 minutes. So how can you tailor the strategy that you've determined is appropriate to fit this 15-minute meeting? But you want to think through what you need for that meeting in terms of your strategy. Do you need a slide deck or handouts? Do you need a packet? Are you going to leave a packet with them when you meet with them? Do they need any other supporting materials that we don't already have available? You should have your legal documents very much in a place where they're ready to present to these investors. So you should have those ready for sure. But do these kinds of investors want access to your business plan, or do they need to see more detailed financials? And are those items ready and available, and are they presentable? We think about having these things available, but we often don't think about what they look like. Do we have our letterhead on it? Is it in the right font? Is it in our color scheme? Do we need a sticker to put on this envelope we're going to hand to them? You want to think about the materials that go along with the conversation that you're having. Okay, so the co-ops that we see having success in terms of their silent phase of fundraising also tend to have success fundraising, generally speaking. As I mentioned before, if you have a strong silent phase of your campaign, indicators indicate that indicates that you're going to have success raising funds overall. But the co-ops that are successful during the silent phase of fundraising are well connected to their community, as we talked about. They have those really strong community connections. They easily recruit and keep volunteers. This is an important one. And if this isn't happening, if you're struggling to recruit volunteers, or if you get volunteers, they just don't stay very long, something's not quite right underneath. There's something happening there we probably want to identify and address before we start down the fundraising path, because this requires lots of volunteers, and we want to make sure that we have the systems and facilities in place to support those volunteers and make sure they keep coming back. Successful co-ops are getting lots of social media engagement. So they built a strong following on social media, and when they're posting, they're getting engagement. People are paying attention, they're watching, they're sharing. That's a strong indicator of success. They have strong event attendance. When the co-op has an event, it's a sellout. It's standing room only. There's people waiting to get in. They can't respond to the emails about the event fast enough. that means your community is engaged and they're ready and they're waiting, hopefully, for you to come to them during the silent phase and ask for money. They have regular communication with their owners. And I like to see co-ops communicate with their owners at a minimum once a month. And I've seen co-ops increasing that lately, twice a month, sometimes once a week. And I don't think that's a bad thing. When our owners know what we're up to, they don't have to wonder. They don't have to guess, is this going to happen? What are they doing? Why did they took my $200 and I haven't heard from them since? You know, we're building relationship with them by staying in communication with them. And while we're communicating with them, hopefully we're teaching them about how co-ops are funded. And this is an area I think I wish I had done a better job of as an outreach manager. And I think probably many co-ops wish that we talk about this a little more earlier on. Or I guess when we get to the fundraising part, we always wish we'd talked about it earlier. But when our owners don't realize that we're going to come back to them and ask them for more money, that puts us at a disadvantage. So if we can tell them from the very beginning, hey, this is how co-ops are funded. This is how we get the capital to open our store. Clearly, my $200 ownership times the 1,000 owners is not enough money to open a store. And this is how we do it. And so they're ready. They know it's coming. And the co-ops who are doing a good job of educating their owners about this are successful. They're successful in the silent phase and they're successful raising capital overall. And side note, I have some content that will be available for co-ops to help you do that, coming hopefully soon after the first of the year. And I think you're going to like it. It's pretty cool. But they also, successful co-ops also prioritize the silent phase. So as I mentioned before, there's lots of work that goes into the preparation of a capital campaign. We're just barely scratching the surface of one little piece. But when we don't prioritize this one little piece, we don't see success. And it's really easy to move the silent phase to the back burner. You've got to get those legal documents ready. You've got to recruit your callers and train them to do this work. You've got to get your marketing materials. There's so much to do that we often just say, oh, we'll get to that later. Or, you know, that I'll do that once the campaign starts, then I'll have time to call those people and talk to them and ask them. Well, at that point, it's too late. We need to be having those conversations way earlier in the process. So if you prioritize this work, you will see success. It's also important to plan and execute. So a capital campaign is an undertaking. It's a project that really requires some significant management. And there are various work streams that are happening simultaneously to plan a capital campaign. You've got volunteer recruitment and communication and legal, and you have to plan for that and execute that plan well in order for this all to play out. I recommend 3 to 6 months to plan an effective capital campaign. 3 is the minimum that I think is required to be successful. 6 is better. The more time you give yourself, the less stress and headache, and the better off you'll be when it's time to execute. And the co-ops that have strong systems in place really are the successful co-ops. So when you're thinking about those volunteers, A, B, and C, who are reaching out to our owners 1 through 10 over here on this list, you know, A has a meeting and they get a check. Somebody gives them $10,000, and B, he's got to follow up because the significant other wasn't home at the time. They couldn't make a decision. And C wants more information. The conversation he had wants more information. Well, how in the world do you keep track of that? Where does that check go? And how do I know that B follows up with 2? And oh yeah, it gets very overwhelming when you don't have strong systems in place. But if you have a good system in place that can support this work and keep track of it for you, and multiple systems, you need multiple systems. You need to be able to communicate with owners. You need to be able to track your fundraising efforts, and you need to be able to know real quick where we stand. You know, okay, how much was that check, and where are we at, and have we followed up with number 2, and have we deposited that check? So there's lots of pieces of the puzzle that you want to make sure you have thought through and that you have systems in place to support that. So hopefully, now that we've talked a little bit about the silent phase and, hopefully now why it's important and have a better understanding of whether or not your co-op is ready, you feel a little bit better about the silent phase of fundraising than you had before we got started. So I'll open it up for questions now. I think in the chat, Jacqueline, JQ, that's what we're doing, is putting the questions there.
Yeah, we're asking people to start off with putting questions in chat, and we'll see how the question, how it evolves. I did have someone direct message me a question, so we'll start with that one.
Okay.
I think you were saying, go when you start your silent campaign, go to those people who've been saying, when that campaign gets started, give me a call. And I think you kind of addressed this later, but their question was, what if no one's been saying that? We've been talking about the capital campaign, but we don't really have people saying, hey, going, hey, yeah, when you're ready to do that, approach me. Is that a bad sign?
Well, I don't, that's a good question. I want to know more. So, I'm curious about the size of the community and the number of owners you have and the engagement level. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so we can see more faces instead of words. And so I'd be curious about that and how long you've been talking about it, how long you've been, really clearly articulating how we raise these funds, because I think if you are actively talking about it and sharing with folks about how this fundraising happens, there should be some folks that are interested. I would think that might be a bad sign. I shouldn't say a bad sign, a sign that maybe there's some homework we need to do, some digging we need to do to see what really is happening there.
That's excellent. Others, questions? You want to throw them in the chat? I think one of the things that came up for me is others are getting their questions together. And I know, there's one, but I'm going to go ahead and throw mine in first, and then I'm getting more questions kind of come in. Is I think people see the silent, like you plan your stages of the campaign. A lot of groups come to me and say, well, how soon do we need to do a certain plan? When do we need to have picked our person who's going to run it? When do we go live? And then they go, and then after they get all done, then they go back and say, oh, and the silent campaign can fit here. Can you talk to like where in that timelining, how much time would you add for the silent? Would you, and I think I know the answer already, but how do you feel about them we tend to plan it out for the main campaigns and not timeline kind of the silence. And what have you run into with that?
Yeah. So when I'm working with a co-op, one of the very first things we do is create a timeline for the campaign. And so we plot out, backwards basically from when we want to start this thing, that very first day, that kickoff, and we plan backwards. So I build in those 4 weeks prior to the campaign, prior to the kickoff, prior to the live portion of the campaign, so that we have everything ready. Because really, when you get to the silent phase of the fundraising campaign, you should be ready to go. The conversations you're having directly one-on-one should be pretty similar to the conversations you're going to have with owners, but those are going to be of a different caliber, a quicker, more expedited conversation probably. So absolutely, I think you need to work the silent phase into your timeline. You need to build those 4 weeks in. And now granted, not everything's going to be finished by the time you start your silent campaign, but those last 4 weeks, you can be fine tuning your marketing. You can be updating the website. You can be doing those communication that communication work that needs to happen prior to the campaign. That doesn't all have to be polished and ready to go by the time you start your silent campaign, but it absolutely should be part of your timeline. And when we don't build that time in, that's when we see co-ops struggling to prioritize it, because it hasn't been something they've been planning for. They've just kind of been like, no, we'll do that when we're ready.
I'm going to jump to this one. I saw some of the questions. I will get back to them, but this one's more specific to our topic rather than broadly about capital campaigns. Wondering about the role of the campaign chair, co-chairs in the silent phase. Should they have already been ID'd and on board before the campaign goes live? Are they sometimes ID'd during the silent phase?
The sooner you can identify your chair or co-chair, the better. A chair and co-chair who have been involved in the planning of the capital campaign are going to be much more successful than a chair or a co-chair you drop in. Like, so, hey, we've been doing all this work for 3 months, and by the way, here's what you're going to do. And this person might have some really great ideas, or, hey, what if we do this? But we've already done all this work to do that. So I say, kind of how we talk about hiring a general manager, the earlier you can bring the GM in to get, acclimated with the project and help direct the direction of the store. Same goes for your capital campaign. The earlier you can get your chair and or co-chair involved, the greater success they'll have.
I think it's an excellent point. And I think it's for the same reason, right? Like, it's a major undertaking that the organization has to have a strategy for. And if they weren't part of building the strategy, not only did you miss their expertise, but you missed their opportunity to see what the problems were with the strategy, or even just to get fully on board with the strategy.
Right.
Exactly. You know how it is executing someone else's plan that you think is 75% solid.
Right. I'd rather execute a plan I think is 100% solid. Yeah.
Right. And then I have some buy-in into.
Exactly.
Okay. So some of these questions are less specific to silent phase. We'll go there for now. But if we have any more silent phase specific questions, I'd love to see those in the chat. Budget wise, what kind of funds are we looking at to have on hand? And Sheila, if you want to add any extra color in the chat about what you mean, I think you mean for the entire process of the capital campaign. But I will throw that to you for now, and we'll see if we get any more color from Sheila in a sec here.
Okay. So in terms of budget for our capital campaign, I have a budget template that I'd be happy to share with you all. But depending, every cooperative capital campaign budget is different. I would say, if you're talking about a range, I would say I have seen co-ops spend between, $15,000, $20,000 upwards of $60,000, depending on the extent of their planning, depending on the extent of professional assistance, legal costs of fortune. That's probably $10,000 or $15,000 right there. When you're talking about the legal documents associated with your capital campaign. So I'd be happy to, if you all want to email me, I'm happy to share the template that I have and line items, the categories of expenses that I anticipate a co-op will incur. And then what it does is it gives you a starting point. So then you can research those expenses in your community. Maybe things don't cost as much where you're from, or you're using a local attorney instead of someone who can give you some pro bono hours. So it helps you kind of helps with the starting point in terms of creating your budget for your capital campaign. But it costs money to make money, and I think that's something that I find that co-ops struggle with. I mean, we don't have a lot of money. We don't. We're startups, and we don't have funds sitting around doing nothing. And so prioritizing what to spend your money on is often a challenge. And if you're going to prioritize anything, I think prioritizing your capital campaign is critical, because if you can't raise the capital to open your store, we don't exist. There's no project. And so really thinking through your budget and deciding, how your co-op's going to spend that money. This is hard-earned owner dollars. And so it's a very significant decision, and it's not one that co-ops take lightly, which I appreciate, and nor should we. But it is something that is an important expense that needs addressed.
Okay, would you prefer people, I can send your email to folks afterwards to send, or would you prefer, if you want, they can drop their emails in the chat if they're interested, and I can collect those and send them to you, and you can send out.
Sure. If you want to do that, that'd be great.
So if folks want to do that, if you drop your email in the chat, Katie is going to reach out to you with that template. Okay.
Absolutely.
So I'll collect those up. Sheila offered a little clarification and did say how much money to get the silent phase started. Katie mentioned getting experts on board in legal, but I think it's kind of one and the same. So I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, it is. It is really your budget for your capital campaign includes the silent phase of your capital campaign. There shouldn't be much more expenditure required for the silent phase than for your capital campaign. Those folks, you might need a different slide deck perhaps, or a more detailed financial statements, but it shouldn't cost us a significant amount of money to produce those. And we can even provide them electronically in some cases if that's more cost effective. So the budget should not, the silent phase should not impact your overall capital campaign budget. It should be part of it.
Great. And though, for those, just so you know, I had one person message me, so don't you have our emails already? We do not hand out your emails to the presenters. That's something that FCI, we didn't ask your permission to do that. So if you're putting in the chat, you just gave me permission to hand Katie your email to get all these free resources. Okay, that's why. Thanks for asking. So I'm going to say I'm a little, Sue, I'm going to have you maybe unmute here, because Sue was, looking at what kind of accounting systems do you like? Do you have an accounting system you like? And I said, are we talking about, for tracking the campaign, or like a full accounting system for the co-op? Your clarification was an accounting to share the donations with members. And so I would like to have you unmute and just explain a little more what you're looking for, because I'm lacking clarity.
Yes, we already have an accounting system, but is there some dramatic visual kind of way to track that and share more publicly with our membership?
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. So that's a great question, Sue. And I think there are two parts of your question. The first part is tracking. So how do you know, in the examples I was giving there, A, B, and C, when they went out and made those first asks, how much money did they raise? And how do you keep track of that and where they are in that process? So that's one piece of the puzzle. I have a sister company called Cooperative that's a CRM system that's built for co-ops to keep track of this. But before that system was born, which it's relatively young, it's just a couple of years old. Before that system was born, co-ops used spreadsheets, and there are other CRM systems that we have found, co-ops have found to be helpful in keeping track of those interactions and those dollars. So you have to be able to keep track of where you are with each owner in the process, and how many dollars they've contributed, and the status of those dollars, if they're collected or not. So that's one piece of the puzzle. And so you want to be able to look at that tracking system and know, okay, we have raised X% of our goal, and that equates to X dollars, and X number of owners have contributed, and our average contribution is X. You want to be able to use that system to identify those key figures, so that you can then publicly, the second part of your question, communicate to your owners and to the public how you're progressing in terms of your capital campaign. So that usually looks like some kind of thermometer for a co-op, a carrot, a beet, a circle. FCI's giving circle is, if you haven't donated to that yet, you should do it. They're using this full circle graphic, which kind of charts their fundraising progress. So something like that, that's available on your website, that you share in social media, that you put in your newsletters. You can even put it at the site and keep it updated. So two pieces of the puzzle there. And when you're to bring the silent phase into the mix, you want to build that visual, so that when you get to that 10 or 15%, that visually looks impressive, so that our followers see, oh my gosh, look, we're already so far along in our progress. Good question. Very good question.
Great. Damon has bringing from Long Beach. The silent phase, are most of the funds collected as loans, preferred stock, or donations?
That's a great question. And every co-op is different. And the focus of your funds will come from your pro forma. So you have to really evaluate when you're building your capital campaign, you have to look at your pro forma and see where you can absorb these costs. How much of your capital can you take as donations, or do you need to take as donations? How does that play out for preferred shares, and how does that play out for loans? And you want to know, leading into your capital campaign, what that breakdown is. Do you need 60% of your funds to come from donations in order to be successful, and the other 40 to come from loans and shares, or what the breakdown is? And then you want to build your strategy to fit that percentage. So if you need 60% of your funds to come from donations, then you need to be asking for 60% of those funds to come from donations during the silent phase. And you probably want about 60% of those funds to be coming from donations when it gets all said and done. Now, those percentages don't always equate across the board, silent phase to the overall campaign, as long as you end up, generally speaking, where you'd like to be, where the co-op needs to be financially in terms of how those investments, how those buckets break down. That's all that really matters in the end. So if it turns out that, the majority of the conversations that you're having at the beginning of your capital campaign during the silent phase, maybe they're all loans, that can end up being okay, as long as the remainder of the campaign, you're focusing your strategy to make up that difference. So long story short, very good question, but you really have to evaluate your pro forma as you're developing your strategy in terms of how you're communicating about your options and how you implement those options in these individual conversations you're having.
And got a direct message one that was, I think, a follow-up on this, which was, and is that are those in the silent phase, does that have to come in as checks or can it be pledges?
Yeah, so that's a great question too. And every co-op creates their own system. My recommendation is that you take the pledge, and the funds will come at, when we're ready for them, when that happens. And that there's a strategy and a process every co-op creates to collect those funds. So absolutely, these are pledges. These do not have to be checks in hand. But what you do have to do is decide as a co-op which one it is for you. Are you collecting checks? Are you collecting dollars, or are you collecting pledges? And how are you communicating that? So if you're communicating to the public, my recommendation is that you're talking about pledges. You're collecting pledges, and then the back end, we worry about the follow up, and we have a team of people who are working on collecting those dollars and getting the paperwork squared away. But some co-ops do make the decision that we're talking about dollars. We're only going to promote to the public or communicate to the public dollars that we have on hand. So that's a longer process. So you can pretty quickly get a pledge. In a conversation or two conversations, maybe three conversations, you can get someone to make a pledge to the co-op. But to get them to write their check, that would take another week or two or three sometimes. People don't prioritize necessarily this work as much as we do. And so they might not be as timely, but the pledge typically comes sooner. And we can follow up on the check. And when I'm working with co-ops, statistically, what I'm seeing is that 1% or less becomes uncollected. These typically are not unfulfilled pledges at any point. Very small percentage in a cooperative campaign tend to be uncollected. So you don't have to necessarily worry about that, as long as you're doing things right. As long as you have the right systems in place and you've got practices to follow up and collect these things and a team doing that. Very rarely do we see that we aren't able to collect a pledge. Things happen, life happens, cars break down, health issues occur. Sometimes people can't fulfill their pledge, but it's usually very small percentage.
I'm getting a lot of direct messages in this one. Usually people put it in the main chat. Okay, so we had the conversation with our board about wanting 100% participation, and unexpectedly there was some kind of bad feelings about that. Some people can't afford it, whatever, felt like they were being devalued. How do we go about having this conversation in the right way? We don't want to make people feel devalued. Absolutely.
Yep, absolutely. I hear that. So every co-op can define for themselves what 100% participation means. And so I encourage your co-op to have a discussion about that, an honest discussion about that. In this day and age, with preferred shares, loans, and donations as an option, it's rare that a board member wouldn't be able to participate at one of those three levels. Loans and shares typically have a higher minimum, 1,000, 2,000, sometimes higher. So that can be financially a burden. but a donation shouldn't necessarily be a burden. $100, $50, $500, that should be doable, I would hope, for most board members to be able to say that they have 100% participation. Another way to look at 100% participation is to put a dollar amount on your volunteer hours. And so you can, there's an average, a national average for the value of a volunteer hour. I think right now it's somewhere around $29 or $27, something like that. And you can quantify the dollar figure associated with that board member's commitment. And now granted, those aren't real dollars that apply to your capital campaign, but you can say that that person has invested significant value in your co-op. And at your co-op, you can decide that that's what 100% participation means for you.
I'm really glad someone asked that, because I think there's also this, as long as you're going to have donations, I think there's also this misconception. Everyone has to come up with $1,000. As long as you have the donation option, it's available to everyone.
Yep.
So, and I think that's usually when I see these conversations go wrong, and you're not the first startup to have asked this question. You know, said it's created a sense of disparity in the board. It's usually because that option wasn't available, and it used to be for startups it wasn't. We did just loans or just loans and preferred shares, but really isn't until recently we even combined those. People talked about it but didn't do it. So, but now with everyone having this donation option, just I think the way you approach saying that that counts and is valuable can shift that combo.
Yeah, absolutely. And the same applies, you know, for your ownership base. You know, when we're talking about loans and shares with the public, sometimes we get that that feeling that, oh gosh, I must not be as valuable if I can't participate at that level. But that's absolutely not the case. That's why we have the donation option. And every dollar helps us.
And it increases your owner participation rate number, right? I think Oshkosh did a beautiful job with that. You know, when they were talking this huge percentage participation rate. A lot of those owners, those were $50 checks, but that percentage rate, I mean, that really made people feel included. So I thought that was beautiful that work you did with them on that. Jolene asked if you ever used the phone bank system Airtable. Is it something you could use for a capital campaign?
Good question. I am familiar with Airtable, have not used it. But I'm not opposed to pursuing any kind of technology. Or I think in our world, we have been hesitant to go down the path of technological support, just because nothing's built for us. It doesn't really work for us very well. But if we can find a way to use Airtable, I'm cool with that. I'm into it. Let's look at it.
I don't know if anyone's done it yet, but Airtable does have the ability to do it. Do look at security. And if you feel the system's secure.
Exactly. That's a big piece of it. Yeah. Very good. Very good point. And this is not something, could be another topic too. Lots of good conversation today, but you know, we're collecting social security numbers in some instances when we're doing loans and shares. So you really have to think about your security in terms of your capital campaign and how you're storing that, where you're storing it, where it lives, who has access to it. Also, all part of the planning process that we'll go through when you're ready to plan your capital campaign. But that's a real good topic.
It is a good topic. Wondering what your thoughts are about an event specific to individual community members to ask for their investment during the silent phase. Yeah.
Okay, so this is a tactic used in traditional fundraising worlds all the time. You know, they have these events for high capacity individuals in the community to solicit, you know, participation in a fundraising campaign. This happens. For us in the cooperative world, we tend to be more inclusive than a kind of an exclusive individual invitation event. So every co-op approaches this a little differently. There's not a bad way or a wrong way to do it. This kind of event does work, but you do want to think through how it translates and how it plays out in your co-op. So for example, we have heard owners push back when they find out that these 10 individuals were invited to an event at this fancy restaurant and I wasn't invited. Well, I thought we were a co-op. I thought everyone was equal. I thought we all had one vote. The way that I have seen co-ops do this successfully is when an owner takes ownership of this event. So in our instance, Peggy, I'm looking at you here on my screen. Peggy's going to invite 10 of her friends to this event. And then we bring everyone together. We have the same kind of conversation, the same kind of ask we would have done previously, but it's not the co-op excluding the other 900 owners. It's just Peggy inviting her friends. So that is a good way to do it. And in fact, I'm working with a co-op now who was kind of struggling with the same topic. What they did, which I think was a great idea, was they asked the facility to host the event. So the facility is sending the invitations. It's a farm to table restaurant who's also an owner at the co-op. So that owner took, ownership of the event and invited, these 40 people to attend. So there are ways around it. It's successful. These kind of events work, but you do have to think through the cooperative side of it and how inclusive or exclusive that can appear.
I love that angle though, because if an owner basically throws an event and invites the co-op to come talk about the loan program or whatever it is, it gives other people the idea they might want to do that too. Which,
exactly. Yeah.
I think we got room for one or two more. And someone said recommendations for thanking, honoring, backers and donors. How do you handle that? It's a big topic, but I thought I'd throw it to you for a little commentary.
Yeah, that is a big topic, very big topic. And every co-op is different. I think that's my answer to every question, which is why I love co-ops. And you have to decide what works at your co-op. I like all or none is my philosophy. So either everybody gets the same recognition. So you got a wall with 300 names on it, regardless of what level you participated, your name's the same size as everybody else, same font, same everything. There's no silver, gold, medallion level. It's everyone, or it's no one. No one gets special recognition because we're all equal. We're all in this together, whether it's our ownership shares, our volunteer hours, our $50 or our $100,000 loan, we all collectively have brought the co-op into existence. So that's my personal philosophy. I have seen co-ops have pretty significant success recently with naming rights for the cheese section, the beer section, those kinds of things. And I think there is a place for that if it fits at your co-op and if you build it in a way that is cooperative, so that this is a 2-year commitment, so to speak, or a 5-year commitment or something like that, where your name is not in perpetuity on the building and you've been out of business for 10 years. This is a short-term strategy to bring in some funds in recognition of your contribution. So there are ways to go about that, but in the cooperative world, we tend to lean towards equality. And I personally lean towards equality, where either everyone gets the same recognition or no one gets recognized.
We lean the same way, but it's becoming an interesting debate.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually have a previous session that was done in FCI Live with Brenda from Oshkosh Food Co-op, who talked about how they did naming rights
Mm-hmm.
And some of the boundaries they put in place. And one of them was that they did, there's an expiration date to those naming rights. But I will say they are the first co-op I've ever seen that actually has done this operationally. It's been an idea that's been kicked around since before my time. Bill Gessner's was pushing this forever. And it already has played out to have some, it has some interesting logistical issues
Mm-hmm.
as you rearrange things in the store, as it's just
Right.
already playing out in some interesting ways.
Yeah.
Damon did ask connected to that. So I see that and kind of perks for large donors. And I almost think we need a session debating the perks for large donors question and showing some examples from co-ops. So Katie and I might cook up something fun with that. And we have to invite someone who I know is very pro the perks. And we can have a nice fun debate on this. But let's say it's an open conversation in the co-op world. Barbara, there's a question about discounting value for tax reasons when you give naming rights as a donation. Yeah, we are close to time and that one's super complicated because it is new for us to be doing naming rights at all at food co-ops. So I hear the question, but I think that's one you would have to work through, with whichever consultant who's helping you develop your program and think that piece through. And neither of us is going to have a quick, easy answer to it. So Katie, is there any last thoughts you want to share with anyone before we wrap up?
I don't think so, other than appreciation that these formats exist and humbled to be a part of it. And I'll be following up with those of you who shared your email to share that budget template. So thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you again to Katie. It's absolutely wonderful to have her here talking about this important aspect of the fundraising and capital campaigns that really hasn't gotten talked about much. So thanks again to Katie. I do want to remind you, we have one more session left in the fall 2022 FCI Live series, Building the Black Co-op Ecosystem. Very excited to have this panel, Ron Hance, for the Network for Developing Conscious Communities. It's going to be a whole panel of Black leaders in the cooperative movement. The videos, everyone's asking. So again, I'm just going to quick reminder, the videos will be out no later than Friday, October 7th. We put them on our YouTube channel. They're probably going to be out a lot sooner. The second we get those done, they're up, they're public. Everyone who's registered will get an email with links to where to find those videos. So that is coming soon. If you're here, you registered, you're getting an email. And lastly, but not least, we really could not make this happen without the generous support of the USDA, National Cooperative Bank, National Cooperative Grocers, and CoBank. Thank you so much to them. If anyone has any last wrap-up questions, Katie has said she will stay after we stop recording.